Hey guys, it's me, Amaterasu, back with another part 2, a hero of Solar and Lunar, aka, what if Deku could control the sun and moon? I'm in a rush, so, without further ado, roll the intro.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Boys, my wheels got in my bag and I got all my feels. I'm getting this paper, I'm stacking a meal. I'm with your hoe in the house on the hills. Yeah. I'ma keep it real, at the sacrifice to try to get my bands up. Shorty wanna fuck with me, she see me on the camera. She said she in love with me, but really I can't stand her. She just want part of this life cause she see me on the ground.
Chapter 9, Eruptions and Combat. Midoriya and Yaoyorozu eventually found a spot where they could talk in private, and they both found themselves at the gardens near the entrance of the academy, seeing the cherry blossoms in full bloom. Midoriya was fidgeting with his hands as he grabbed the gift that Amaterasu, or now his mother, wanted him to give to Yaoyorozu. So, this is what she wanted to give to her ... and quat. He eyed the hairpin as it glowed softly in his hands, giving off energy and warmth that felt very calming to him. The sun on it was glowing brightly, as if it was catching your attention on purpose. It was the main detail of the hairpin, while the clip of it was a golden tone, and overall, it was very beautiful and the craftsmanship was exquisite. He turned to see Yaoyorozu looking down as she clenched her jacket, as if she was expecting for something bad to happen. Midoriya was confused as he got closer to her and placed his hands on her shoulder, startling her. "Are you okay, Momo?" he asked his girlfriend, who looked everywhere but at him. He sighed and finally figured out why she was like this, but he didn't ask about it in fear that something bad would happen, knowing his luck. He fished the hairpin out of his pocket and hid it from her as he was trying to find the right way to do this. "Why don't you put it on her yourself, my son?" Amaterasu's gentle voice played through his mind. Midoriya couldn't think of a better solution, so he did what his mother had suggested. As he gripped the hairpin, it then started to glow and then changed into a hairband, but with the exact same design of the hairpin, only difference was the sun was now bigger, like the size of most flowers on a headband. He felt the change, but didn't question his mom's reason for making it a hairpin first, and then changing it into a hairband. "Momo, can you please close your eyes for a moment?" Midoriya asked nervously. She looked at him in confusion before closing her eyes, and after a couple of seconds later, she felt his hands flow through her hair as he was gently stroking her head, causing a massive blush to appear all over her cheeks. She then felt something on her head as she no longer felt his hands in her hair, which disappointed her a little. "Okay, you can open your eyes now." And quat. The first thing Yaoyorozu saw was the blushing face of Midoriya as he scratched his cheek sheepishly. She then hovered over her hair until she felt the hairband and slowly took it off. She gasped as she saw the hairband, and then looked over at Midoriya as tears started to appear at the corners of her eyes as she launched herself at him, causing him to lose his balance, and both of were sent tumbling down into the flower beds. Midoriya felt the wind knocked out of him, but he still wrapped his arms around her as she had wrapped her arms around his neck. They stayed like that for a while, until Yaoyorozu sat up in Midoriya's lap as she placed the hairband back into her hair and smiled. She felt the warmth of the sun and Midoriya when she had the hairband on. "Izuku, thank you." And quat, she said as she leaned down and pressed her lips onto his, surprising the boy as he wasn't anticipating it. She pulled back and smiled at him. Midoriya silently thanked the heavens for bestowing him such a beautiful and caring girlfriend, causing his mother, who was still there, to laugh softly at him. "I'm glad she liked the gift. I'm sure you're wondering what it does, and it's just a simple protection charm from any dangers she might face. It also increases her power, granting her a small portion of solar energy, but it won't be tapped into unless she gets training. I advise to train her after the festival, as it would just make her lose focus. Anyways, she's a very lovely girl, son. I'm expecting grandchildren," Amaterasu said as she left the area. Midoriya sighed and grew red as he imagined little babies with both of their looks, eventually frying his brain due to an overload of cuteness. But, he quickly gained his head as he felt Yaoyorozu getting up from his lap and held out her hand for him. "Come on, they did a 5-minute call for the remaining people for the final event. We don't want to be late, now do we?" she said teasingly as she gripped his hand and pulled him up to his feet, then proceeded to drag him to the stadium. They managed to get there in time as both of them were panting slightly, causing a couple of people to look at them weirdly, but no one questioned it as Midnight walked up to the stage with a box in her hands and placed it on a table that had appeared from the stand. People were anxious as the final event was about to be revealed. For the final event, it is. Midnight was about to say it, but Ojiro raised his hand up, catching the pro hero's eye. Yes, Masharao Ojiro? Midnight said, waving her whip. Midoriya turned and saw the look of someone that lost his will to continue forward, and the air around him confirmed it. The green-haired boy looked concerned as everyone else was now looking at his classmate. After a couple of seconds, Ojiro sighed and looked at Midnight. I would like to resign from the final event. And quote. Everyone gasped as Midoriya and Yaoyorozu looked at him with confusion. Hagakure ran up to him. Why, Ojiro? Hagakure asked. Concern was present in her voice, but he didn't meet her gaze, or didn't try to look at her. Are you sure, Ojiro? This is a rare opportunity for all of us. Are you sure you want to do this? Midoriya asked as he looked at his classmate with concern. Ojiro met his gaze and a sad smile appeared on his lips. I don't remember much of the cavalry battle. I felt like a puppet. That wasn't how I wanted to proceed with the festival while everyone got here with their best efforts, but not me. That is why I want to resign from the event. I want to win with my own powers, not by being a mere puppet. And quote. Ojiro said, his voice projected throughout the entire stadium. Several people were concerned for him as he had a downcasted look on his face. Ojiro, are you truly okay with this? Midoriya placed his hand on his shoulder. Ojiro looked at him and nodded. My pride is on the line. It's the last thing I have right now, class rep. Midoriya turned to see Hagakure looking at him, and Yaoyorozu looking on with concern. After thinking about it for a couple of seconds, Midoriya turned to Midnight. I believe Ojiro should be able to resign. And quote. Everyone looked at him like he was crazy while Ojiro smiled at him. Then, someone else stood forward and raised his hand to get everyone's attention. He was from Class 1B and was on the same team as Ojiro. Midoriya then turned to the purple-haired guy with bangs under his eyes and watched as the boy didn't seem fazed by anything. Midoriya narrowed his eyes on him and began to make notes about him. He then turned back towards the Class 1B, who introduced himself as Shota Narengeki, also wanted to resign. His reasons were the same as Ojiro's, and told a similar experience about how he didn't remember much of the fight. Midnight was looking at the two boys, and placed a finger to her chin as she was debating on if she should allow it, or not, and then saw their convictions and made up her mind. A smile appeared on her face as she pointed her whip at the both of them. I see, very well. I will allow the both of you to resign the event. With their resignation, we will need to fill those 2 spots. Team Kendo, your team came after Team Shinso. Will you please select 2 members to participate? Midnight turned her gaze towards the orange-haired girl, and her team. Actually, I would like to hand that proposition to Team Tetsu. We were frozen for most of the event while they were working hard. I believe that's not fair on our part, right girls? Kendo turned to her group, who all nodded, and she then turned to a stunned Tetsu and Shiozaki. Are you sure, Kendo? Tetsu asked, and she nodded. Midnight was interested with the turn of events and turned to Tetsu's team, motioning them to pick their 2. After a small discussion, Shiozaki and Tetsu were chosen. Midnight smiled as the event was now ready to begin, so she smiled and walked over to the box. She tapped her finger on it and looked at all of the freshmen. Alright, will the remaining students please come up and grab a lot from the box. And quote. Everyone walked up and grabbed a lot before returning to where they were standing. After a while, the paper disappeared and was replaced with a bracelet as it clasped around their arms. Midnight then asked everyone to scan it up on the stage, which took 10 minutes to do so. Once everyone scanned the bracelet, it disengaged from the arm and fell to the floor. A screen began to appear as Midnight had a smirk on her face. Now, we will see the brackets for the final event. A 1v1 match tournament, Midnight shouted, and the audience went nuts as this was what they wanted. Several agencies began to take out notebooks and get situated so that they can scout for potential internships. Midoriya felt pumped as he got a chance to see Tetsu's and Shiozaki's quirks in actions, plus he got the opportunity to test his actual combat prowess against different people. Murmurs traveled among the group while the screen suddenly started to cycle through the faces of the remaining freshmen. It's displaying the matches of the first bout. And quote. Midoriya said as he looked at the screen closely until it stopped and sighed when he saw it. He felt someone staring at him from behind, but Midoriya didn't think much of it as he gazed at his opponent's picture on the screen. I see, so that's the leader of the group that Ojiro and Shota were in. His quirk must be something that can force someone to become a puppet. Problem is, what's the condition that needs to be triggered for him to do so? I'll talk to Ojiro after this. The first bout is between Class 1A's Izuku Midoriya, and Class 1C's Hitoshi Shinso. The rest will follow after. After that, the matches were all set as people were pumped from the event, especially Kirishima as he was facing Tetsu. Midoriya made note of the matches as he began to create a couple of scenarios in his head. Todoroki will win, not discounting Sero, but he isn't as strong as Todoroki. Who knows? Something might happen unexpectedly. Kaminari and Shiozaki will be interesting as she was in the top 10 from the entrance exam. And she has a lot of power. That fight will be tougher to come up with a conclusive winner, while the match between Ashido and Aoyama favors Ashido more. Ida and Hatsume, I truly don't know. My main concern is Uraka and Momo ... and Quat. He turned towards the two girls, who were talking to each other about something. He then looked over at Bakugo as he stared at the screen in confusion, as if he didn't know Uraka at all. He felt the air around Momo grow colder as the minutes passed, but he didn't want to intervene as of now and began to walk towards the designated spots for where they should wait. He went to the room as he was the first match of the event. He then proceeded to go into deep thought as he didn't know the trigger for Shinso's quirk, so he thought about it, not hearing the door open and close. Midoriya ... and Quat. The green-haired boy quickly turned, seeing a familiar tail and white uniform. Midoriya relaxed and set his hands on the table before looking at his classmate, watching as he took the seat across from him. So, was there something that you wanted to talk about, Ojiro? Midoriya asked. Ojiro nodded and began to explain what happened with him during the cavalry battle, and how he couldn't control his body while his mind was unaffected. Ojiro continued to explain what he felt like when his body was under Shinso's quirk, which made Midoriya furrow his eyebrows as he listened to Ojiro's story. Midoriya held his hand up and waved it in front of him, getting the tailed boy's attention. So, what happened before your body was manipulated? Midoriya asked him. Ojiro thought for a bit and then a light bulb went off in his head. It was when everyone was looking for members. He approached me and said something that angered me. I responded to him, anger getting the best of me, and then, I was his puppet. And Quat. Ojiro clenched his fist. Midoriya looked at him before connecting the pieces together, or the fact that Ojiro gave him what he needed was apparent. Midoriya nodded and stood up as the match was about to begin. All I have to do is not respond to any of his comments, verbally, definitely. I'm not sure about something like sign language or something along those lines. Anyways, I'm pretty sure you had already figured it out. I appreciate the advice, and I'm sure I can win this fight. And Quat. Midoriya said as he made his way to the door and gripped the knob, hearing Ojiro getting up from his chair. Good luck, Midoriya. Thanks. Midoriya opened the door and walked out to the center stage with Ojiro following close behind until they reached the intersection. Ojiro looked at Midoriya and began to walk up the stairs to Class 1A's booth, hearing Hagakure's and Ashido's voice coming from there. I'll win this for you, Ojiro. And Quat. The blonde stopped and looked at him, seeing the green-haired boy giving him a thumbs up, and walked towards the arena. Ojiro looked at the retreating figure of the class representative before making his way up the stairs, only to be knocked to the ground by Hagakure once he had made it to the top. He saw his class looking at him, all smiling at him. He grinned and patted Hagakure's back before taking his seat next to Jiro and Kaminari, then Hagakure took the other spot next to him. Everyone was anxious for the first bout as they were trying to contain their excitement. Alright, it's time for the first bout of the final event, ladies and gents. Here, our two fighters are coming out of their respective entrances. First off, we have Class 1A's class representative, Izuku Midoriya. He has successfully stayed in first for the entire festival thus far. Will he manage to continue that trend? Find out. As for his opponent, the only Class 1C student to make it, Hitoshi Shinso. Which one of them will win? But make sure to give your plus ultra. Plus ultra, everyone shouted as the two contestants made their way up onto the arena that was made and centered. Midnight appeared as she stood on a platform, as she was the referee for the event. A timer also appeared right next to her, displaying 15 minutes on the screen. Midoriya nodded as he looked at his opponent. He calmed his nerves as he stretched his body, while Shinso just looked at him with a passive look. People in Class 1A were concerned for Midoriya like Ojiro as he had a troubled look on his face. Are you okay, Ojiro? Hagakure asked him, a concerned look on her face. He didn't say anything as he nodded and planted his gaze at Shinso. I'm worried about the match. And Quat. Is it more like you're worried about Midoriya? Don't worry, I'm sure he can win this. He isn't the class representative for nothing. Go Midoriya, she shouted out to the green-haired boy, which he heard and smiled at the invisible girl before going back to his stretches. Ojiro found his nerves to be calm, and his mind free from his troubled emotions from a couple of seconds ago. Now he felt more at ease. He felt someone place his hand on his shoulder, and saw that it was Kirishima and Kaminari behind him. I don't think there is anything to worry about, Ojiro. Midoriya's got this in the bag, he's very strong, and I doubt he came into this without a plan. That's not his style. And Quat. Kirishima said. Kaminari agreed, and people began to chip in with their own little comments about Midoriya. Ojiro smiled and nodded as they all turned back to the arena as the match was about to start. Midoriya finished his stretches and walked to where he was supposed to, seeing Shinso do the same as Midnight waved her whip in the air. Is everybody ready? Alright, let the match begin, Midnight shouted, and the cheers of the crowd empowered the excitement that was about to go down. Midoriya didn't move, and neither did Shinso, which caused everyone to look at the two of them confused. Midnight looked between the both of them, but noticed that Midoriya had a calculated look in his eyes, as if he was studying Shinso and his every move. "Well, aren't you going to attack me?" Shinso remarked as he stood in a relaxed position as he eyed Midoriya, who just looked at him as he stood. People were looking on with confusion, while other people were getting impatient. Midoriya exhaled as he then began to walk towards Shinso. His face showed confidence as he took small, choppy steps towards his opponent. Shinso noticed this and felt a drop of sweat fall down his back. "Ojiro, that's name, right? The monkey that resigned when he had a shot at winning. What foolishness. And quad." Shinso exclaimed at Midoriya, but noticed that his opponent wasn't paying any attention to him. Midoriya gritted his teeth as he continued to hear Shinso mock Ojiro for resigning from the vent. As it continued non-stop, Midoriya bared his teeth and disappeared out of sight for a split second until he reappeared right in front of Shinso. The gloomy boy threw a punch blindly, but Midoriya swatted it away before punching him in the stomach and then kicked him out of the ring. Shinso grunted when he came into contact with the ground, sprawled as the kick knocked the wind out of him. Midoriya just looked at his opponent before turning his gaze to Class 1A's booth and held out a thumbs up. "Hitoshi Shinso has been knocked out of bounds. The winner is Izuku Midoriya," Midnight shouted as the whole stadium erupted with applause and cheering. Midoriya exhaled before making his way over to Shinso, who was now sitting upright as the medical team was checking for any injuries. The two of them stared at each other before Midoriya sighed and sat down right in front of him. "Listen, Shinso, you want to become a hero, correct?" the green-haired boy asked, causing the purple-haired boy to look at him and scoffed, turning his head to the side. "Of course I do. I'm going to become a hero to prove everyone wrong. And quad," Shinso said. Midoriya raised an eyebrow at him, causing Shinso to sigh and looked at him. "I wasn't born with a quirk like yours, Midoriya. With the quirk I have, people see me as a villain just because I can control someone if they respond. Naturally those people drive me to prove them wrong and to become a hero without a flashy quirk like yours. Since you've beaten me, that dream will soon die. And quad," Shinso said. "I see. Well, if you think that a simple defeat will diminish your chances of becoming a hero, then you're surely lacking in resolve. If you want to become a hero, then you're going to need resolve and the motivation to do so. You have a cool quirk, Shinso, so if you use it like a hero would, then people would start to see you in that light, just saying. Anyways, great match, Shinso," Midoriya said as he sprinted back to his side of the arena, and waved at his class as he entered the hallway. "I told you Midoriya was going to win, Ojiro," Hagakure exclaimed, causing him to smile at her. Yaoyorozu had a smile on her face as she made her out of the booth to meet Midoriya in order to congratulate him. Midoriya had Shinso's words in his head as he made his way back towards the waiting room to grab something that he had left there, not noticing his girlfriend running up to him. "Izuku." Midoriya turned only to come face to face with Yaoyorozu's chest, feeling her wrapping her arms around him as she pulled him closer to her. His face went red as he was pulled even closer to her chest, which felt very soft, and he ended up sighing in relief as it was a nice feeling for him. After a couple of seconds, she pulled away, much to his dismay, and smiled at him. "Where are you going?" she asked as she gripped his arm and looked at him. He smiled and told her that he was going to the waiting room to grab his phone, which he had placed on the table at the far back of the room. She nodded and went with him, holding his arm as they made their way to the room and enjoyed each other's company. Midoriya's face was slightly red as he felt his arm press into her chest, and he was trying really hard not to faint from embarrassment, but he still greatly enjoyed the feeling and that he was spending some time with his girlfriend. Then, his mind went to the date they had planned after. "Oh crap, I totally forgot about the date. Damn it, Izuku, how could you forget about the date she had asked you?" Midoriya was mentally beating himself up over it, which caused Yaoyorozu to look at him with concern and gripped his arm tighter. "Izuku, are you okay?" Midoriya broke away from his thoughts and looked at Yaoyorozu, seeing the concern in her eyes. He was conflicted on rather if he should tell her or not. He opted to tell her because he didn't want to concern her any further and that they should have trust in each other. He calmed his nerves and gripped her shoulders, which caused her to face him as she grew even more concerned. They stayed like that for a little bit until Midoriya exhaled and looked at her. "Momo, I'm sorry for forgetting about the date. And quad," he said solemnly, only for him to get a perplexed look on his girlfriend's face as she furrowed her brows at him and cocked her head to the side. Questions marks began to appear all around her body as some even bounced off of Midoriya as he felt like he asked something that didn't even happen. Yaoyorozu looked at him with confusion until she went back to when she was mad at him. Then she had a look of realization. "Oh, you mean that? To be completely honest, I forgot about that since that was right before the USJ incident, so I don't blame you for it, Izuku. And quad," Yaoyorozu said to him. Midoriya sighed in relief before looking at her face, noticing a subtle hint of disappointment as they continued to walk to the waiting room. They ended up passing Sero as they almost reached the room. Sero waved at both of them as he walked past them since his match was about to begin. Midoriya felt the confidence that the tape user had, however. He's facing Todoroki. This will be a very difficult battle for Sero. I believe that Todoroki will win, not discounting Sero's strength after all. Midoriya watched as Sero's figure disappeared around the corner. Yaoyorozu looked at him, understanding what he meant, and then looked back at the corner. Still, I kind of feel bad for Sero. He has to face someone way above his skill level, and so early too. What's even worse is that Todoroki isn't even using his left side in the fights. It makes me wonder why he doesn't use it in the fights, as it would make him even more of an unstoppable opponent. And quad, she said as they entered the waiting room, and Midoriya jogged over to the table to grab his phone. He quickly went through his phone to see if he missed anything and pocketed it when he saw that he didn't have anything urgent. Say, Momo, about that date, would you like to go on one after the festival? Midoriya stuttered out as he fidgeted with his fingers, and was sweating bullets. Yaoyorozu blushed a bit but hugged him from behind and inhaled his scent. She felt so warm and safe every time she was near him. Of course, Izuku, I am your girlfriend after all. And quad, she joked as she spun him around and wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer to her as she smothered her lips onto his. Midoriya's mind went blank as he savored her taste as he gripped her waist and pulled her in closer, pressing her onto his chest as they enjoyed each other's embrace. They broke apart as they needed to breathe, and that the next match was about to begin as President Mike announced that Todoroki had won, which surprised the both of them. He won that fast. Anyways, it seems like I'm his opponent next. We should get moving, your match is coming up soon. And quad, Midoriya said, and she nodded as they made their way back towards the booth, passing by Kaminari as his match was about to begin. He waved at the two of them as they had a little chat over the blonde's match. Midoriya and Yaoyorozu wished him luck as they made their way to the booth, taking a seat next to Uraka and Ida as the third bout was about to begin. Kaminari and Shiozaki walked up to the arena from their respective sides as Midnight began the match. Kaminari started out with sending a copious amount of electricity at Shiozaki, but all she did was turn around and summon a wall of vines that insulated her from the shock. She then grabbed him with her vines as the blonde was currently in his short-circuited state. She then hung him out of bounds, making her the winner of the bout. Midoriya was writing notes on her quirk while he had a smile on his face as Jiro was almost crying as she watched Kaminari was being carried out of the arena to the medical room. Her quirk is pretty powerful. If I'm going to fight her, I need a plan, as she did come in fourth in the entrance exam. Surprised she isn't in class 1A, unlike a certain purple-haired pervert I know. And quad. He did a quick glance at Mineta before concluding his notes over Shiozaki until he felt something hit his head, and recoiled back a bit as it almost hit his eye. He gritted his teeth and looked over and saw Monoma looking at him with a smug grin on his face. Whoops, my bad. That was just a celebration as Shiozaki beat one of you class 1A hotshots. And quad, he said smugly. Midoriya glared at him as he gripped the side of his head. Yaoyorozu looked at Midoriya with worry before she stood up and glared at the blonde. Jiro was on a similar boat as her ear jacks were ready to gouge out his eyes. Everyone else could feel the bloodthirst the two girls had as some of them backed away from them while others were really interested in and continued to watch on. What the hell is wrong with you? That was uncalled for and on purpose. Yaoyorozu growled out as she was ready to gut the smug bastard, as said bastard didn't take the hint and smirked at her. Oh, and what is the VP of class 1A going to do? Monoma said as he gripped the barrier between the two classes. Kirishima also got up and was about to step in, but suddenly there was a loud whack, as the face of Monoma dropped out of view, and the face of Kendo took his place as she had an apologetic look on her face. I'm sorry about him, Midoriya, I hope that it didn't hurt too much. I don't know what's wrong with this guy. Once again, I'm sorry. And quad, Kendo said and then disappeared from the view of class 1A. People dropped their guards as they turned their attention to Midoriya as he gripped the side of his head. Yaoyorozu moved his hand away and saw that there was a trickle of blood on his forehead. She quickly made some gauze and disinfectant, and wrapped it after she disinfected it, earning a grunt from the green-haired boy. After some basic medical attention, Yaoru sighed as she finished her operation. Midoriya felt better as he hovered his hand over the wrap and then smiled at her. Thanks. And quad, he said, causing her to blush, and nodded. They then saw Tokoyami grab the can from the ground and threw it in the trash. I'm glad that it didn't hit your eyes, that would have been very bad, Midoriya. And quad, Tokoyami said. Shoji agreed as he looked at the barrier between the two classes. Hagakure was ranting towards Ojiro as she was jumping sporadically and was using very colorful language while the blonde tried to calm his friend down. Man, what an asshole. And quad, Jiro commented as she looked at Midoriya. Most of them agreed. Midoriya sighed and then turned to find Hatsume stepping out of bounds and sweat dropped. Everyone else followed suit, and as the fourth bout was over, and Midnight declared Ida the winner. Midoriya sighed as he would have expected something like this with Hatsumi even though he just met her not too long ago. But he couldn't deny that it was a great way to expose herself to the world. The next bout was between Ashido and Aoyama, which ended rather quickly as Ashido used her quirk to swiftly tire out Aoyama, or in this case his stomach would. She used this opportunity as he had used his power too much and she took the initiative to uppercut him, knocking him out of the ring, declaring her the winner. Yaoyorozu stood up from her seat and motioned for Midoriya to follow her, which he did and the two of them descended down the stair and into the hallway, meeting up with Ashido in the process. "Hey guys," Ashido said as she skipped to them, her face beaming with happiness. "Yeah, that was a great match Ashido, keep it up," Midoriya said to her, causing her to chuckle as she swatted his back hard. He yelped and playfully glared at the pink cat. "Thanks Midoriya, but my match can't compare to your and Todoroki's fight once it starts. People are already betting on who's going to win that match. I placed a bet on you, of course. Right now, it's split down the middle. Anyways, Yaoyorozu, your match is about to begin soon, right? Well, good luck on that. I need to go to the infirmary just in case anything happened that I didn't catch. And quad." Ashido waved as she sprinted down the corridor. "Ashido sure is lively, isn't she?" Midoriya said and looked at Yaoyorozu, who smiled and nodded as the two of them leaned on the wall. "Midoriya, look. And quad," Yaoyorozu said, looking at Midoriya as she held the hairband in her hands, playing with it as she looked at him before handing it over to him. He looked at her before slowly grabbing it from her and waited as she smiled sadly at him. "I gave it much thought, and I also noticed that the hairband you gave me had some amount of energy that you possess with your quirk. I would like if it wasn't like that. I want it to be a normal hairband and not something I can use in combat. I don't feel right using this in the fight with Tokoyami. It feels as if I'm cheating in a way, and I don't want that. I want to win my own way with my own quirk. I appreciate the thought, but I don't want to keep on relying on you for everything. And quad," Yaoyorozu said as she looked at him. Her conviction was sound. Midoriya looked at her before smiling a little and nodded, grabbing the hairband and absorbing the energy from within until there was nothing left. "Would you like it back?" he asked, and she deadpanned. "No, please throw it away. Of course I would like it back. It is technically a gift from you, even though it was through your mother. And quad." She whispered the last part, but Midoriya still heard her and pouted, causing her to giggle and pecked him right in the cheek. Both of their faces were red, but both of them were smiling as they waited for her to be called up. "Anyways, Izuku, how is your studies? If you need any help, then please come to your girlfriend for anything. And quad," she said to him enthusiastically, causing the boy to chuckle at her enthusiasm before bringing his hand up to his chin, thinking of all the classes. Then he had his subject. "To be honest, I'm having trouble in English. The new material is somewhat confusing and hard to pinpoint, like I have some of it down, but I want to have it down 100%. And quad," he said to her before stepping back a bit, seeing as how her face was really close to his. Her face was light up with excitement as beams of light were emerging from her, indicating her feelings. "Really? I can help you with that exclamation mark. I know. How about you come to my house so I can help you with that, and after that, we can go on our date." "That sounds like a great plan. What about you, Izuku?" Yaoyorozu said as she gripped his hands together, a bright smile on her face at the notion of studying with Midoriya. He chuckled slowly as her obsession with anything academically was kind of appalling to say the least, but he liked that about her. The two of them were always butting head in academics since they were the top two students in that regard. They had a healthy rivalry going on in class to the point where Aizawa forced them to stop answering the questions to give the other students a chance to answer them, which peeved the both of them quite a bit. "I'm down for that, actually. But, what about the date?" he asked her. "We can create a plan for that after we finish our study session. And how does 8 a.m. sound for you? You already know where I live and all. And quad," Yaoyorozu said. He nodded and then a horn was sounded, meaning that the next bout was about to begin. She smiled and then looked at Midoriya. "Looks like I'm up. Cheer for me, yeah?" She laughed as she jogged out the hallway and into the center stage. Midoriya smiled as he watched her stride into the area with confidence. "Good luck, Momo. And quad," he said as he was about to go back to the booth, but a bright light appeared in front of him, forcing him to shield his eyes until it dimmed down. He slowly looked at the figure and gaped like a fish at the figure, a radiant smile on her lips as she looked at him. "Amaterasu. And quad." He looked at her with surprise. She smiled at him as she walked past him and watched Yaoyorozu stretching her body for the fight. "Yes?" she asked, still looking at the VP of Class 1A. "Why are you here? More importantly, how are you here?" "That's none of your concern, dear." "I'm being serious, Mom. How did you?" "I said it's none of your concern, dear." "Yes, Ma apostrophe M. And quad." Amaterasu chuckled as her son pouted before eyeing the hairband in Yaoyorozu's hair. She then turned to Midoriya, who was in deep thought. She smiled as she crossed her arms over her chest. She didn't want the extra power? I see, so that's her response. Can't say I'm surprised. I actually like that. You have a strong girlfriend, Izuku. Make sure you protect her, okay? That's my mission for you, to protect her in this world. Amaterasu's tone grew serious as she turned back to Midoriya, snapping him out of his thoughts as he looked into her eyes. Listen Midoriya, the quirk you possess, Celestial Homage, it allows you to control the sun and moon, and it allows you to use powers that are based around those things, correct? He nodded, and he started to grow weary as she didn't use his given name, instead opted to use his familial name. Your research had pinpointed powers like mine and my husband's, alongside a couple other pantheons. Again, he nodded as he was trying to piece things together to figure out where she was going with it. Midoriya looked at the being with a blank expression on his face, causing Amaterasu to sigh in disbelief before walking over to him, a flame growing in her hand. What I'm saying is, my champion, is that due to your research on your quirk, you were able to increase your knowledge about different abilities and gods that are synonymous to celestial homage. An example is myself. I originally was a part of your quirk, but with your research and studies, essentially you were able to enhance your powers. Amaterasu said, closing her hand, smothering the fire in the process before walking away from Midoriya, but looked over her shoulder and smiled at her champion/son. Anyways, my champion, your girlfriend is about to begin her battle. I suggest you pay attention. She said, but Midoriya wasn't paying attention. Instead, he was mumbling to himself and was writing on his hand with his finger. Amaterasu rubbed her temple before walking over to him and lightly tapping him on the shoulder, but that didn't get his attention. But he also lightly slapped her hand away and continued to walk around while mumbling. She shook her head and created a fireball and sent it at Midoriya. He saw it at the last second, and squealed in terror, falling down onto the floor, his heart racing. He quickly got up and was about to glare at Amaterasu, but he saw her pointing to the center of the arena and he understood what she was talking about. We'll discuss things further on when we have the time, however, right now, please do focus on your girlfriend. Amaterasu said before disappearing. Midoriya looked at the spot she was in before taking at her place as the match was about to begin. He had many thoughts running through his mind, but he pushed them all to the back of his mind, but a lingering thought crossed his mind. As he ran his hand through his hair. Alright, let the sixth bout begin, Midnight shouted as Yaoyorozu was about to charge forward, when she saw Tokoyami standing there and immediately stopped. She looked at him confused, but quickly dodged out of the way as Dark Shadow blitzed her, but she managed to guard the attacks as she rushed Tokoyami. He continued his assault, but Yaoyorozu managed to evade and block the attacks as she got closer to him. She swung her staff at her classmate, but he managed to dodge and sent Dark Shadow to push her out of the ring, but she managed to create a flashlight and turned it up to the max, forcing the shadow back as she used that opportunity to strike Tokoyami in the stomach. He grunted and retreated a bit, but she didn't give him any time as she rushed him once more with the flashlight, weakening Dark Shadow some more. She then quickly stepped to the right and delivered a couple of swift jabs to the ribs, and then delivered a kick using her pole as momentum, sending him back a bit. Impressive Yaoyorozu, I expected nothing less. Tokoyami said as Dark Shadow returned to him. He was breathing hard from the combo that she did, but he wasn't down for the count. Yaoyorozu wiped some sweat from her forehead as she smiled at him. And I the same, Tokoyami. However, I will win this. She charged at Tokoyami, the flashlight still in her hands as she sidestepped out of the way and whacked Dark Shadow with her staff as it passed by her. She then placed the flashlight in her mouth as she created multiple flash bangs from her arms and threw one at Tokoyami, who used Dark Shadow to encase himself the light, even though it weakened Dark Shadow. This gave Yaoyorozu to create rope as she then sent a couple more flash bangs at the barrier Dark Shadow, hearing the cry of the shadow as she launched even more flash bangs at the barrier. With the rope she created, she threw it at Tokoyami and then opened her top, exposing her black bra to the crowd as she created a mirror and then a bigger mirror from her back as she created even more flash bangs to create another round of cover. Tokoyami was sweating as he felt the light hit Dark Shadow, and he peeped out from a little hole Dark Shadow had made for him and saw what Yaoyorozu was planning. If she manages to finish what she's doing, I'll have no choice but to surrender. Very well done, Yaoyorozu, I can see why you were recommended to the school. However, I'm not done yet. Once the flashing stopped, Tokoyami quickly sent Dark Shadow at her, which shocked Yaoyorozu as the speed of the shadow was faster than she had anticipated and was sent crashing into one of the mirrors she had created, but she managed to hold her ground. She felt blood trickle down her face, but she didn't mind it as she felt the energy from her hairband flow through her body and began to heal her wound. She held her staff as she gripped the flashlight that was in her mouth and threw it at Tokoyami. The light was at its max. Dark Shadow swatted it away, blocking Tokoyami's sight for a few seconds, but it was enough for Yaoyorozu as she created several more flashbangs and threw them at Dark Shadow and Tokoyami at the same time, causing the shadow to weaken even further while blinding Tokoyami. She used the opportunity to get in close and kick Tokoyami in the chest before striking him multiple times with her staff. Dark Shadow then quickly went over to protect its master, but Yaoyorozu planned for that and sent a couple of flashbangs in advance, intercepting the shadow. But the shadow managed to land a punch at her side, causing her to cough out as she was sent flying to the other side of the arena, almost sending her out of bounds, but she shakily stood up and noticed that Tokoyami had recovered. 2 minutes left. Yaoyorozu heard that, but she stayed calm even though she felt a sharp pain in her side. She breathed in and out before once more getting into her stance, creating even more flashbangs and placed them on her belt that she created. Tokoyami sent Dark Shadow at Yaoyorozu, as he wanted to push her out of the ring, but she knew that was his ultimate goal, so she quickly created a big mirror and shined the reflected light at the shadow, paralyzing it for a couple of seconds as she quickly dashed straight for Tokoyami. But he read her and quickly dodged out of her way and broke the mirror using Dark Shadow. Then he sent it straight at Yaoyorozu, knocking her down, and used that opportunity. He ripped off her belt. He threw it out of bounds so that she couldn't get them. But Yaoyorozu smiled as she charged once more. This time she held a wooden sword and was even faster than before. Dark Shadow, Tokoyami yelled, sending the shadow, but all of a sudden, a bright flash of light exploded right in front of him, causing him to grunt in pain as his eyes were blinded by the flash bang, and then he heard a couple more go off, presumably to keep the shadow away. She must have planned this out, turning my attention away for just a split second so that she could place a flash bang out of my view. I must say, I'm very impressed by her. And quat. He thought before he was whacked a couple of times before being thrown out of the ring, a smile on his lips as he landed on the ground. The pain wasn't all that bad as his vision came back to him as he saw Yaoyorozu holding her hand out to him. Are you okay? Sorry about that. And quat. She apologized and bowed before him. He waved her off as they looked around. Cheering was heard throughout the stadium. Fumikage Tokoyami was thrown out of bounds, making Momo Yaoyorozu the winner. Midnight exclaimed. People were cheering both of their names as the two of them made their way back to the infirmary. Both of them spotted Midoriya waving at them as he met them at the hallway entrance. Both of you guys were great out there. That was an amazing battle, he said, stars in his eyes as he saw two amazing quirks at work. Tokoyami smiled and excused himself in order to go to the infirmary. Yaoyorozu smiled as she winced a bit from the pain in her side, causing Midoriya to look on with concern. She waved him off, but he shook his head and placed his hand on her side before chanting a small verse. Then her body was engulfed in a light. She felt the pain decrease and then it just disappeared. She looked at him stunned as he gave her a thumbs up with his tongue sticking out a bit. She chuckled a bit and smiled at him. Let's head for the infirmary, just to make sure. And quat. She said and walked past him, continuing on her original plan of action. He smiled and ran up to her side, making their way to the infirmary. Both of them conversing about the fight and the strategies she had planned out just in case the one she used to win didn't go as planned. The two of them busted out laughing as she explained some of her plans, which were utterly ridiculous. Midoriya smiled as he saw the look in her eyes and couldn't help but feel prideful for a bit, but his smile masked the troubled look that Midoriya had as what transpired earlier was the reason why. But he didn't want to think about it now as he wanted to focus on Yaoyorozu. I'll worry about it later, when the time comes. And quat. Chapter 10, The Fight of the Festival. Do you see here, Sonny? Recovery Girl pointed at several x-rays showing the bones in Yaoyorozu's body, more particularly her left arm and ribcage. It showed several fractures and cracks in multiple areas, which would indicate that she would be in some amount of pain, but she was acting all fine when they had arrived. Midoriya was looking at the old lady as she walked over to Yaoyorozu and began to use her quirk, kissing the areas that were shown in the x-rays. Midoriya looked on with wonder, seeing the green aura surround his girlfriend's body as she healed her back to perfect condition. I healed up your bones so they should be good as new. As for you, mister, your healing is amazing. However, you're still a novice in the terms of medical treatment. To elaborate, your healing just handles the problem's first layer, and not the core of it. I suggest you practice your healing ability and to learn more about the medical field, all the while not taking the risk of not handling the problem. Just handle the small stuff and leave the heavy stuff to the professionals, alright? Now, do head on back, the last bout is about to begin, and a patient is arriving shortly. And quat. Midoriya and Yaoyorozu snapped their heads over to the older woman, who was currently getting a couple of things together. Wait, what do you mean the last match? What happened with the 7th bout? Midoriya exclaimed as he gritted his teeth, as he didn't get to cheer Uraka on. But he shook his head and looked at Recover Girl's face fall a little, which automatically signaled something bad happened. The 7th bout ended with the victory of Katsuki Bakugo by a ring out. Ochako Uraka gave it her all and had him on the ropes, but he quickly bounced back and finished the match. Don't worry, her injuries aren't too severe and just a couple of bruises, sprains, and cuts. Anyways, please leave as I need to set up, and here you go young lady. Quat. She handed Yaoyorozu a sucker and shooed them out of the room. The two of them looked at each other with worry as they saw the bots carrying Uraka, who was unconscious, and entered the infirmary. Midoriya couldn't help but feel guilty that he wasn't there to support her, but he pushed it into the back of his mind as he looked at Yaoyorozu opening the wrapper and popped it in her mouth. Strawberry flavored. Quat. She said as she smiled and looked at him, who had a look of disbelief. She huffed and began walking towards the booth, hearing the steps of Midoriya as he caught up to her and kept in stride with her. The two of them walked the corridors of the stadium, passing by a couple of other people. The two eventually made it to the booth and saw the exact moment as Tetsu and Kirishima knocked each other out, signaling that a draw has occurred. This fight is a draw. Once they regain consciousness and they have rested for a couple of minutes, the winner will be decided via an arm wrestling match, Midnight said as she hopped off the platform and walked to the arena, alongside several recovery bots. Midoriya sat down in his usually spot and Yaoyorozu followed suit as they were disappointed that they didn't get to see the last two matches of the first round. Say Jiro, what happened in the last two fights? Yaoyorozu asked as she looked up at her friend, who was currently twirling her earbud. She looked at her before bringing her finger to her chin. The fight with Uraka and the asshole was, to say it in lamest terms, brutal. That bastard ditched out everything he had against her, but she managed to stand her ground and even had him pushed back. Then, I guess he blew a fuse and overpowered her, sending her crashing into the wall. TSK, what a asshat, no chivalry with him. The fight with Tetsu and Kirishima was a draw from the beginning. The only interesting part was what you saw. Quat. Jiro concluded. Yaoyorozu nodded and looked at Midoriya, who had an expressionless look on his face, but she noticed how he pawed at his pants and watched as it strained against his leg sleeve. Midoriya ... and Quat. She frowned as she glanced at the blonde, looking rather uninterested at what was going on. From the moment they had met at the beginning of the school, she began to dislike him, which was further increased as his crude behavior became evident in everything he did, from the apprehension test to the simulation battle, had irked her very core. And, every time he yelled at Midoriya always made something in her snap, but she would always remain calm and collected as usually either the green-haired kid dealt with it himself, or a teacher would. She bit her thumb as her thoughts were swirling around in her head, but the lingering feeling that something is bound to happen stayed put. When will be the day when I finally snap of Bakugo's aggravating personality? She thought as the two boys had recovered from their battle and soon, they were setting up the arm wrestling match. She sighed as she nudged Midoriya, causing him to look at her in confusion. She pointed at the stadium, and he nodded before putting his focus on the match. Midnight then took her spot right next to the concrete block, thanks to Cementos, and ushered the two boys to step up, each taking a different side of the block as they planted their elbows. Their quirks activated as they gripped each other's hands tightly as Midnight placed her hands on top of theirs. The winner of this will move on into the second round of the tournament event. I'm sure you all know the rules to this, and remember, no cheating. Alright, are the two of you boys ready? Both of them nodded as she smiled and released their hands. Immediately, the two boys put everything they had into their hands as they tried to win this. Kirishima gripped the side of the block with his other hand as he put every last amount of strength he had, and Tetsu did the same, resulting in a draw, but the two boys didn't give up as they continued their match, not breaking eye contact with each other. Several pro heroes were commenting on their resolve and passion. Both of them started to yell out as they tried to overpower the other, until the steel in Tetsu's arm began to crack, alarming the Class 1B student. But Kirishima capitalized on that as he yelled out, and eventually slamming his opponent's hand to the concrete. Both of them were breathing heavily as Midnight waved her whip, signaling the match was over. Eijiro Kirishima defeats Tetsu in the arm wrestling match. He will advance to the second round. Give a round of applause to these two amazing contenders. Cheers roared throughout the stadium as Kirishima helped Tetsu up and smiled. Both of them locked looks and firmly shook each other's hands. Midoriya smiled at it, but grew serious as it was now the second round of the event. And now, will everyone turn your attention to the screen as we present the bouts of the second round. Our freshmen are doing amazing out here, and these fights will only get more and more intense from now on. Here are the matches. Midnight motioned towards the screen as the next matches were being displayed. The first bout will be Izuku Midoriya vs Shoto Todoroki. That will be a match that everyone is looking forward to as these are the two students that are projected to win the tournament, alongside Katsuki Bakugo. Who will win? You don't have to worry as it will be the first fight. Second bout will be Tenya Ida vs Ibara Shiozaki, another great match to watch. Third bout is Momo Yaoyorozu vs Mina Ashido. And finally, the fourth bout will Katsuki Bakugo vs Eijiro Kirishima. That's the top 8 of this tournament. All these fights will be amazing. You don't want to miss this. Midoriya frowned as he stood up and made his way to the waiting room. He quickly looked around him and quickly opened the door before shutting it behind him. He sighed before looking around the room. Alright, Amaterasu, let's talk right now. Midoriya said. Lo and behold, she appeared in a dazzling light right in front of him. A smile played at her lips as she eyed the green-haired boy and then sat down on the table. He looked at her before walking up to her and looked at her. You want to continue our previous conversation? Are you sure? You have a big match right around the corner. Amaterasu commented as she drew her blade from the sheath and began to inspect it, putting Midoriya on edge as his instincts alerted him. But she shook her head and sat it down on her lap. He lowered his guard a bit but kept a close eye at it. She sensed his alertness and chuckled as she brandished the sword. Don't be so alert, after all. Midoriya saw her hand move, but he couldn't react as she swiftly swung the sword at him. He gritted his teeth as he was ready for the imminent pain, but he didn't. He slowly opened his eyes and saw that the blade was stopped a few centimeters from his body, like a barrier was placed all around him as she slashed a couple more times, each getting increasingly faster and stronger, but it was the same result. Midoriya looked at her as she sheathed the sword and sighed. Opening one eye, she glanced at him and smiled. Anyways, like I said before, research will improve your quirk as it did for my own power. By researching ancient myths about the sun, you were able to get a grasp of what you can do with your current abilities. Wonderful job by the way, and you were able to improve your quirk by simple research. So, in addition to researching quirks and getting information through observation, you should consider researching more about your quirk and its ties to ancient and maybe even some modern interpretations in the future. Oh, and here is this. Amaterasu held out her hand and showed an image of the sun, causing Midoriya to look at her on confusion. What is that? He asked, but she didn't answer as she gently pushed the image towards him, and watched as it glowed right in front of him before disappearing. She smiled and just shook her head. That crest is yours. Well, you have 2 exactly. A sun and moon. Shocker, huh? Anyways, this crest is what binds the 2 of us together, and is the source of the link that you and me have, sort of like a telepathic tether in a way, meaning that we can communicate with each other through our minds. Of course this link can be severed if you wish it to be, and vice versa. Do you get that as well? Amaterasu asked, which he once again nodded as he groaned a little as she was telling him the least important stuff, or rather the things that he wanted to be informed of last. As he was about to speak again, she grabbed his hand and began to chant something that he couldn't understand, and all of a sudden, she started to glow brightly. Midoriya instinctively looked away until she returned to normal. What was that? Midoriya asked as he checked himself, until he checked the back of his right hand, the one she grabbed, and on it was a celestial sun just like Amaterasu's, but it was a reddish-purple color and looked more badass than hers. She smiled and disappeared into a ball of light, then Midoriya absorbed it. He looked down at the crest, and felt the heat of it as it glowed brightly before dimming down. I made our pact official, as we weren't necessarily a pact when we first met and also when I made you my champion. We can do the ritual right now, however, this will also be a shortened form of it since it will take too long. Now that it's official, you can now tap into my power, hence the god form and the ability to temporarily give a boost in your power. I must warn you that the time limit of the form is dependent of the current mastery over it, so basically, you're a novice, so that means the time in that form will be around 3 to 5 minutes depending on your energy and ability to control said energy. However, going overboard can lead to an enormous amount of strain to your body, and excessive times of overusing that power will dissolve your body from the inside out. Now that's something you don't want to experience. Anyways, I advise you to only use that form if you really need to for now. Once we get some time, I can help you improve the amount of time you can stay in that form. One more thing, depending on your emotions, celestial homage will obviously react differently. Sounds pretty usual, right? Anyways, your match is about to begin. I wish you the best of luck, my champion. Amaterasu said before going quiet, causing the young boy to sigh as he didn't get to ask some questions, but he figured that it should wait as his current focus should be Todoroki. Alright, I'm ready for this. He cracked his knuckles and made his way to the hallway leading to the center stage. He saw Toshinori standing there and waved at him, getting one back from his mentor. He stopped in front of the lanky man. What are you doing here, All Might? Midoriya asked him. The hero chuckled and ruffled the green-haired kid's hair, earning a disgruntled yelp as the older man laughed and the boy followed shortly after. After they stopped, Toshinori placed his hand on Midoriya's shoulder and looked at him in the eyes. Kid, you've made me proud. Now, I want you to win this match. Better yet, win this festival and show the world what the next symbol of peace can do. Anyways, kid, how is Ofa? Midoriya began to fidget with his hands and he began to pace the floor as he looked everywhere but the hero. To be honest, I'm still at 10%, and I really haven't been doing hot with it as of late. Midoriya confessed, but Toshinori shook his head and got the boy's attention. Young man, even if 10% doesn't seem that much, you learn to control that much in such a short of time that it's really impressive. It may be small now, but your potential with it will one day succeed even my power, and you will be an even greater hero than myself. Remember, a hero will always strive to improve themselves and their quirks. Alright kid, I've kept you here long enough, remember to give your plus ultra. The older man held out his arm towards the boy, who looked at it for a bit and then realized what he wanted. Yeah, I'll give my plus ultra. Midoriya fist bumped him and walked into the center stage. A sudden air of confidence surrounded the young man, putting a wide grin on the hero's face as he watched from there. Midoriya made his way to the arena as the crowds cheered for the start of the second round of the tournament. Alright folks, the first match of the second round is about to begin. It will be Class 1A's Izuku Midoriya versus Class 1A's Shoto Todoroki. These two freshmen have been the main focus of this festival as the two of them have maintained their ranking of first and second, respectively. Now the two of them will battle each other to see who will advance into the semifinals. Who will win? Who knows? Both of them are complete powerhouses and so strong that it turns me on. Midnight gushed out, causing several people to question her commentary while others weren't bothered by it. Midoriya walked up to the stage and looked up to see Todoroki making his way up the stairs as well. The two boys stopped at their designated place and waited for the match to begin. Finally, I get to show that bastard father that I don't need his damn side to beat you and win this tournament. And quad. Todoroki said as ice began to collect at his fingertips. Midoriya just looked at him as he began to collect energy throughout his body, and once more, his eyes turned golden, and his hair gained the familiar tint of gold that he always donned when he got serious. Todoroki smirked as the two boys were ready to get the match started, and the crowd liked the tension the two of them were making. Their cheers became louder as people were taking sides in the fight, some even making bets on who was going to win. The Class 1A booth was pretty split on who was going to win, and some were even arguing with each other. I think that Todoroki is going to win, Kirishima. Dude's a freaking badass, Kaminari yelled at the redhead. No, Midoriya has got it in the bag. Bro's a manly man. Kirishima backed up his bro as the two of them continued to argue. They were all split on who was going to win, but the majority were leaning towards Midoriya as he was more likable than Todoroki. Jiro was chuckling at Kaminari for being stupid, then she turned towards Yaoyorozu, who had a concerned look on her face as her mind was off in her own little world. Jiro looked at her before following her gaze to Midoriya and tapped her friend on the shoulder, startling the onyx-eyed girl. Yaoyorozu quickly fixed herself and looked over at the shorter girl. You wanted to talk to me, Jiro? She said as she smiled at her, causing the purple-haired girl to frown as she knew it was a forced smile. Jiro sighed and whispered in Yaoyorozu's ear. Are you okay? You've been staring at Midoriya the entire time. Do you think Midoriya is going to lose to Todoroki? Yaoyorozu quickly pulled back and shook her head, causing Jiro to raise an eyebrow as she was confused on Yaoyorozu's current behavior. Are you okay, Yamomo? You're acting strange, out of your usual character. Did something happen? Jiro questioned her friend, noticing how she would steal glances at Midoriya, and then she started to piece the clues together. Wait, you are worried about Midoriya? Yaoyorozu's eyes widened as she tried to deny it, but couldn't bring herself to do so and nodded timidly. Jiro looked at her in surprise and then grabbed her hand and the two of them walked down the stairs until they were out of earshot of the other class members. When they reached a good spot, Jiro turned to Yaoyorozu and looked at her expectingly. Momo. And quad. Yaoyorozu's attention automatically zoomed in on her friend as she called her by her first name, which would have made her happy if it wasn't in a situation like she was currently in. After a couple of seconds, Jiro looked at Yaoyorozu in her eyes and with a serious expression on her face. What is your relationship with Midoriya? Yaoyorozu's eyes widened a little, which the earphone jack user caught, and stayed silent as her eyes darted all around except for her friend's face. After a couple of minutes later, Jiro sighed and placed her hand on her shoulder. You like him, don't you? Jiro questioned, and prayed that her friend would extricate her behavior, but alas, her friend kept quiet as she stood there, gripping the zipper of her top. The constant zipper action began to irk Jiro as it continued. The sound of it zipping and unzipping sent her over the edge and she gripped her friend's hand and held it up to her face, getting the taller girl's attention. Yamomo, we're friends, right? Then you can tell me what's bothering you, come on. It's not like I'm going to laugh at you or anything. And quad. Jiro joked, trying to lift the mood up, but she saw Yaoyorozu's expression as her face was all scrunched up in worry and concern, and occasionally steal glances out the hallway towards the way to the arena. Jiro huffed in annoyance as she mentally apologized to Yaoyorozu and slapped her friend across the face. Yaoyorozu's face looked shocked as she gingerly brought her hand to her cheek and placed it on the spot where she slapped. Jiro's hand stung as she gripped it and looked at her face, seeing the shock and anger in her eyes. Why? Yaoyorozu had the biggest glare she had ever seen, and she wanted to flee, but she stood tall and glared at her friend. I did that because you're putting too much thought into this fight. Don't you believe that Midoriya will win? Jiro yelled at her friend, which caused a vein to appear on Yaoyorozu's forehead. Of course I believe that Izuku will win. I'm worried about the aftermath of the battle. This fight will be intense, and he will probably obtain injuries in the process. Why are you questioning my concerns? Can't a girlfriend worry about her boy? Yaoyorozu quickly covered her mouth, blushing slightly at what she was about to say, but Jiro smirked as she leaned closer to her. I knew it, you and Midoriya are dating. Even on first name basis, too? Wow, you guys have grown that close to each other. And quat. Jiro slyly said as she nudged her shoulder, irritating the black-haired girl further. Jiro stopped and chuckled at her friend's annoyance before returning back towards her serious expression. If you guys are dating, then you should have a lot more faith in him than what you have now. If he gets hurt, it's your job to be there for him when he needs it and vice versa. You know, he was cheering for you during your match. And I must say, he was very vocal, and it was very cheesy, but he cheered for you nonetheless. Come on, we're going to miss the match at this rate. And quat. Jiro said as she turned around and made her way back towards the booth. Yaoyorozu looked at the back of her friend and smiled as she quickly caught up to Jiro, and the two of them made their way back into the booth. They took their seats and watched as the match seemed like it was about to start as both Midoriya and Todoroki were ready to duke it out. Alright, ladies and gents, the match is about to begin. Are the two fighters ready? Midnight looked at the two of them, and both of them nodded as they got into their stances, their quirks already beginning to appear around them as Midnight grinned widely and held out her whip. 3, 2, 1, let the match begin, Midnight yelled, and immediately Midoriya rushed Todoroki, sending multiple rays of light right at him. Todoroki countered it by making wall of ice as a loud crash was heard as the rays made contact with the ice, melting some of it. The ice user looked at the area of collision and frowned at it. It should have been reflected. How? Todoroki glared at Midoriya. A cheeky grin was on the green-haired boy's face as he held up his hand. The light around his fist looked a lot more sporadic and the color was a more orange-yellow. Midoriya then sent a wave of light, and once more, Todoroki created a wall of ice. His eyes widened and quickly sidestepped out of the way as the wave of light sliced through the ice. He then felt a cut on his cheek and glared at the boy before sending multiple shards of ice, followed up by a wave of ice. Midoriya quickly created a solar barrier that melted the shards before sending the barrier forward, melting the wave in the process, but didn't notice the second wave of ice shards and ended up getting pierced in the shoulder by the tip of it. He grunted as he yanked the shard out and healed the area, but it felt tender. Todoroki charged forward, covering the area around him with ice, increasing his speed and launched another wave of ice, and used the wave to block his movements and exploded the wave with another ice attack, hitting Midoriya's solar barrier. Right where I wanted you, Midoriya said as he fired a ray of light that hit Todoroki square in the chest, sending the boy flying. The ice user grunted and closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them, Midoriya was right in front of him as he punched him in the stomach and used the momentum to combo into a roundhouse, sending him into the arena floor. The green-haired kid grunted a little as he looked at his leg to see that Todoroki had frozen some of his leg in the process. He melted the air with his aura and saw Todoroki standing up, a look of hatred on the boy's face as he launched multiple waves of ice. The damage that Midoriya had on his leg forced him to dodge, but still got clipped by the wave and a couple of shard impaled the same leg. In retaliation, Midoriya used lunar energy and created a wave behind the fire ice user as it connected with Todoroki's back. With the wave, Midoriya sent a solar wave at the boy. The two moves collided with Todoroki in the middle, creating an explosion as dust was kicked up into the arena. A wave of ice surged from the impact zone and caught Midoriya off guard as it froze his left arm and leg. Midoriya grunted as he quickly went into a defensive stance, creating a barrier as he couldn't see what was going on. On instinct, Midoriya stepped back as a pillar of ice thrusted out of the cracks below his previous location. Then it began to branch out in unimaginable speeds, forcing the boy to release his barrier and launched a pulse of solar energy, clearing the dust cloud and saw that Todoroki had encased the outer edges and even parts of the center area in ice. Even Midnight's platform was covered in ice, with the pro hero encased partly with ice. She had an annoyed look on her face as she shivered a little. You're good, Midoriya, but I'm going to beat you using only my right side. I'll prove that I don't need that bastard's power, Todoroki yelled as he created a wave of ice that traveled a lot faster than his previous attacks, catching the Ofa user off guard, but he quickly countered with two light waves. The first one was the more destructive one and the second traveled a lot quicker than the first, hitting the unsuspecting boy. It knocked him off balance and Midoriya took the opportunity to dash in and sent Delaware Smash at the boy, but it was damaged as Midoriya shook of the pain and punched the stunned ice user, forcing the boy almost out of the ring. Todoroki created a wall of ice that stopped him from going out of bounds. Anger swelled in the heterochromia boy as he sent large amounts of ice at Midoriya, with hopes of crushing him with sheer force. Midoriya looked at the huge amount of ice and held up a barrier, but the ice in the cracks jutted out more spikes, some even impaling his foot and his leg. He grunted as he was forced to drop the barrier and sent a giant ray of light in desperation. The attacks collided with each other with an explosion. Several ice shards flew into the air in all directions, and Midoriya came up with an idea and sent copious amounts of solar rays, hitting the ice shards, causing them to reflect off of the surface and go everywhere, hitting Todoroki and Midoriya both and even some of the crowd, but Midoriya made sure that they didn't do any harm to the audience. He felt slightly rejuvenated as the warm rays were absorbed into his body, but he noticed several ice shards in his other leg, and saw the trail of ice on the ground, with Todoroki at the end. A harsh glare on the boy's face as he sent another wave of icicles at Midoriya, but the boy launched a ray of light, melting the ice and colliding with Todoroki's chest, sending him back, but he once again created ice to stop him. Both of them were breathing heavily as wounds were all over their bodies. Midoriya panted as he didn't bother healing his wounds to conserve energy, and then he looked at his opponent with a smile on his face. Do you see what's happening? I'm still standing after your desperate attempts at winning. I thought you were going to win using only your right side? At this rate, you're going to tire out before I do. Midoriya taunted as he looked smugly at the fire ice user, getting under his skin as he felt the glare send tingles down his spine, but he forced it back. Midoriya then rushed at Todoroki, catching him off guard as he was there in seconds, and grabbed a hold of the boy and quickly threw him over his shoulder, and sent a Delaware smash at the airborne boy. In the spur of the moment, Midoriya teleported and punched Todoroki, sending him crashing into the ground. I can teleport? He said as he tried to teleport again, but was caught in a counter by Todoroki as he sent a multiple tendrils of ice, and managed to trap Midoriya in it. The fire ice user then sent multiple shard of ice at the boy and got in close and punched Midoriya with his ice encased fist in the stomach, but was sent back as Midoriya broke his leg free and lashed it out, sending a wave of solar energy at him. Just give up, Midoriya. You can't win. And quat. Todoroki huffed out and sent a wall of ice. However, his frostbite was getting the best of him. The wall was easily avoidable as Midoriya took advantage of it and sent a lunar wave at Todoroki, and made it disappear as he dodged a sloppy punch from Todoroki and uppercutted him in the chin, and then created a solar fist above the boy and sent him straight into the ring. Midoriya was feeling the repercussions of using his quirk as he felt his energy decreasing at a constant rate. Damn, I have to finish this and help Todoroki before I run out of energy. Midoriya looked at his two broken fingers and sighed. He needed to work on Ofa as he's getting sloppy at it, but he shook his head and focused on his opponent as he had trouble standing up due to the amount of damage he had sustained in the fight. I have to win, to prove I don't need my damn father's power. Damn you, Midoriya, why won't you go down? Todoroki shouted angrily as he was beginning to go over his limits, and sent a massive ice storm at Midoriya. Damn, a new attack? Damn it, got to start going overboard too. Midoriya thought as he held his hand out to the sky, his body glowing as a massive ray of light shot down from the sky, engulfing the entire stadium. It lasted for a second as Midoriya fell to his knees, panting heavily, and the corners of his eyes were starting to become hazy, but he pushed through and stood up, gritting his teeth as he saw Todoroki still standing, but barely. A massive glare on the boy's face, almost a look of bloodlust. How come I haven't defeated you yet, Midoriya? Todoroki shouted as he clenched his hands into fist, not caring that frostbite had appeared on his left side of his body. Midoriya looked at him and shrugged his shoulders, almost in a mocking manner as he looked directly in his eyes. You want to know why? It's because you're weak. Claiming that you deny half of your quirk and want to be a hero is laughable. Half-assing is what you're doing, and I've never met a hero that half-asses their work because some lame excuse like their past. Utterly pathetic. If that's how you want to see things, then give up being a hero. And quat. Midoriya said, crossing his arms to his chest, and glared at Todoroki, who was seething with anger and roared, launching a massive wave of ice, but Midoriya simply melted it and appeared right in front of him, sending a punch to the chest, kicking his side, and launched a ray of light at him. He was sent flying, but then hit the lunar wave Midoriya concealed and was paralyzed, and then was sent into the arena floor by Midoriya's kick. Todoroki coughed out and stood up, wobbling a bit as Midoriya landed on the ground. Midoriya, you bastard. You don't understand how I feel, so just piss off, Todoroki yelled out as he tried to send another wave of ice, but the frostbite zapped his energy dry and fell to his knees, panting heavily. You're right, I don't understand how you feel, but an idiot uses the past to blind themselves from the truth. You can't deny that your left side is a part of you now, and you can't cast it off. It may be your father's power, but now, it's part of your quirk, Todoroki. And quat. Midoriya said as he looked at Todoroki, who had his eyes wide and suddenly clenched his head in pain. Todoroki began to remember his childhood, feeling the pain and suffering he went through because of his father, and the look his mother gave him. He clenched his chest as he remembered everything. "Shoto, do you like All Might?" his mother asked him, and he had the biggest smile on his face, all the while holding up an All Might figurine. He nodded happily as he smiled. "Mommy, I want to be a hero just like him, and a hero to you as well." "That's sweet, Shoto, but you already are my hero." She hugged him tightly, a smile on both of their faces. "You say you want to be a hero, then be one. The past is done, but the present, you can become the hero you want to be. Your quirk is your own, no one else's. It may be your father's power, but the way you use it and how you perceive it is your own. It's your quirk, Todoroki. You have the power to be the hero you want to be," Midoriya yelled out at him. All of a sudden, his heart stopped clenching as he looked at Midoriya's eyes, seeing the conviction and drive in the boy, and smiled softly as he closed his eyes. "Shoto?" "Yes, mommy?" "No matter what people think, your quirk is your own. Use it to become the hero you want it to be, the hero that will make me proud of you." "I see, so that's what your aim was, Midoriya, thank you. And quat," Todoroki said, and his left side began to ignite a blaze as the flames grew more and more intense. Todoroki had a grin on his face as he felt the frostbite on his right side melt, and the flames grew more and more intense. Holy crap. Those are some massive flames. As expected of the son of the number 2 hero, so powerful. Is that Todoroki's left side? Holy crap, what power. I can feel the flames from here, Ashito exclaimed as the rest of Class 1A were staring at the flames in amazement, except for Yaoyorozu, as she was growing increasingly worried at Midoriya and his current condition. She already knew what he was planning on doing in this match, and of course she questioned it as was a gamble. But, she shook her head and pushed that worry to the back of her mind, and then she cupped her mouth. "You can do it, Midoriya," she yelled out as the cheering of the crowds was dialed up a couple as it was getting to the good part. Several agencies were now getting serious in their scouting as they were writing down everything that they could on the 2 boys. Toshinori was watching the match from the hallway and was growing increasingly concerned for his student, gripping the corner of the wall harder. "Who do you think is going to win?" Nezu said to Toshinori, startling the hero as he turned and looked at the intelligent animal. "Principal Nezu, good to see you, Sir Dodenquat," Toshinori said. The animal chuckled and walked right next to the teacher. "I'm glad that my students are giving it their all. However, I have yet to hear your answer, Toshinori Dodenquat." Nezu looked up at the lanky man, who was deep in thought, and was about to answer, but the animal held up his paw. "I assume you were going to say Midoriya, your successor, weren't you?" "I believe so too, Dodenquat," Nezu said before going back to watching the match. Toshinori looked at the animal before looking at his student. "I see you are aiming to help young Todoroki, Midoriya. I am very proud of you." Midoriya looked at the flames and couldn't help but feel amazed at the sheer power of the flames. He then began to power up himself, feeling the sun beating down on him, and the energy he had began to surge through his entire body. However, it didn't feel much as he started to feel his energy was weaker than Todoroki's. He began to think of what he could do, until Amaterasu interrupted his thoughts. "Remember that your quirk is much like Todoroki's, however, since you've been training both aspects of the quirk, you should be able to use both at once. However, it does expend extra amounts of energy, so at the moment I suspect you'll last approximately 5 minutes. This isn't the god form, unfortunately, call it the yin and yang form. Keep in mind, since I'm the only servant you've met thus far, the yang aspect of the form will be more prominent, as in stronger. Anyways, please do win this match, Master Dodenquat." Midoriya nodded and felt his quirk's energy pool together. An aura began to form around him. Silver on gold, swirling all around him as wind started to pick up all around him. It became so intense that people were forced to shield their bodies from the wind. After gathering enough energy, he held out his hand, and a yin-yang appeared in the sky before a blinding light forced everyone to shield their eyes as well. Once the blinding light had dissipated, people quickly looked on the arena to see Midoriya. "Is that Midoriya?" Kirishima exclaimed, seeing the completely different look the boy was sporting. Midoriya's hair was a silvery gold with a golden aura around him. He opened his eyes, revealing one silver eye and a gold eye. Yaoyorozu looked at him in awe and then looked at the sky, gasping at the bizarre detail of it. "How is the moon up at the same time as the sun?" she asked herself as she already knew the answer and looked at Midoriya, a calm and passive expression on his face. The 2 boys were showing off their quirk's powers to the entire world. Both were ready for the final stretch. "Are you ready, Midoriya?" Todoroki said, holding out his flame-engulfed hand, and ice was forming around his foot. Midoriya smiled as his hands glowed silver and gold. The 2 of them looked at each other before Todoroki shot flames at the green-haired boy, but he blocked it with a lunar barrier and then launched several waves of energy, cutting through the ice that Todoroki had erected. Midoriya then dashed in, blocking the ravenous fire that was thrown at him and kicked him in the stomach before snapping his fingers, sending rays of solar and lunar energy all around the ring. Todoroki quickly recovered and sent multiple ice shards at Midoriya in very close range, getting a couple of good hits in before sending the boy crashing into the stadium using his fire. By now the arena was all cracked and broken, and the battle itself was getting more and more intense, but the crowd was loving it. Several of the classes were amazed by the sheer amount of power that was being displayed, while others were fearful of those too. Midnight, I believe this battle has gone long enough. And quat. Cementos said as he moved into position just in case something bad was about to happen. The risque pro hero looked at the battle and shielded her body as shockwaves shook the entire stadium. She nodded and began to tear her hero costume, causing several people from the stands to whistle in approval, and she sent a flirtatious wink at their direction. She activated her quirk and released her pheromones to incapacitate the two boys, but the force of their attacks caused the mist to be blown back. Midnight gasped as she shielded her body from the increasing amounts of debris. Cementos noticed this and quickly shielded his fellow hero and then turned to the arena, seeing both of them panting hard, but they were collecting their energy as if they were going to finish this right now. The both of them looked at each other as they gathered everything they had and then some. Once they were ready, the two of them charged at each other. They were only focused on the other as they got closer and closer to each other. They were about halfway when cement walls began to form in front of them in order to stop them, but they continued to charge at each other, and once they felt like it was the right time, they unleashed their attacks. Celestials embark, Midoriya yelled, sending an immense amount of celestial energy, as the solar and lunar energies intertwined, creating a sword construct and sent it at Todoroki. Icy flames melt down. With both of his hands, Todoroki joined the fire and ice and launched at Midoriya, a huge wave of engulfed flames of ice at Midoriya, not caring about the cement walls, only each other as the two moves collided, causing a huge explosion to occur as dust was kicked up, and debris from the arena and cement walls were sent flying everywhere. The whole stadium shook violently as people were protecting themselves from the debris. Yaoyorozu created a wall in front of the booth while Kendo shielded her class with her hands while Shiozaki tried to help ease her pain. Once the stadium stopped shaking and everything was calm, the dust slowly started to settle, showing the destruction of the arena. Some more dust was still present, but it too settled, and it revealed an unconscious Todoroki on top of some rubble. Kirishima broke the wall Yaoyorozu created and saw Todoroki, but none of them saw Midoriya, causing Yaoyorozu's heart to sink in distraught as there was no sign of the green-haired boy. She was about to look away, but saw movement from some of the debris and quickly jumped down from the booth, creating a mattress to help with her fall and rushed over to the area. She got there and quickly began to move some of the debris as the movements were beginning to be more and more forceful until she stepped back and Midoriya sprung out of it. Multiple cuts won his forehead as he coughed out. Izuku ... and quat. She said and smiled as he looked at her and smiled. Midnight got up and rubbed her thighs before looking at the scene in front of her. She looked at the state of the two boys before sighing and raised her whip high in the air. Shoto Todoroki has been knocked unconscious and is out of bounds, making Izuku Midoriya to the winner of this bout, Midnight said and stepped forward before falling off of whatever she was on. The stadium roared with applause as people cheered Midoriya's name. He looked around and then to Yaoyorozu before seeing his vision suddenly go black as he fell to the side. She saw this and quickly caught him before he could fall on the concrete floor. She then placed him on her lap as she waited for the medical robots to retrieve him. She looked down and saw his beaten face, but she smiled and ran her head through his hair, then placed a kiss on his forehead and closed her eyes. You did great, Izuku ... and quat. Chapter 11, An Unwavering Resolve. Midoriya stirred before opening his eyes, seeing that he was once again in the infirmary. He groaned and ran his hand over his face. Sighing, he hoisted himself up and placed his feet on the ground. He was in patient clothing and looked at the garbage can, seeing a PE uniform and assumed that it was his. The door opened and Recovery Girl walked in with a tray of some snacks and water for the boy. She placed the tray on a table and looked at the boy. Ow! Midoriya gripped his head as she had whacked him with her walking stick. Shaking her head, she went over to him and checked his vitals just in case. Once she deemed that it was in the clear, she sat down on her chair and began to rub her temple. You're becoming irregular, Sonny. That's not a good thing, although, you remind me of your mentor and quat, she said. Midoriya's eyes widened as he stood up, but he almost lost his balance from the lack of energy at the moment. Wait, Recovery Girl, you know about All Might? He asked her, causing the old lady to chuckle and grabbed a photo from her desk. She passed it over to him. It was a picture of her in her younger years and a younger All Might in crutches. It was almost laughable, but he noticed the smile that would always appear on his face. Midoriya studied the picture some more before handing it back to Recovery Girl. I was there when his true form would appear, but no matter how many times I would warn him, he would always push his limits. I can see that in you too, Sonny, and I often criticize him for that. Anyways, you're free to go. Young Todoroki is okay, he was released not too long ago. As for the matches, Tenya Ida was defeated by Ibara Shiozaki due to a stadium out, Eijiro Kirishima lost to Katsuki Bakugo due to a stadium out, and Mina Ashido was defeated by your girlfriend due to a surrender. I must say, young Yaoyorozu sure is a sweet girl. She was here, watching over you until her match began. Make sure to treat her well, Midoriya. And here is your spare PE uniform. Aizawa stopped by to drop it. And quat. Recover girl said, causing Midoriya to smile as he lingered near the window to soak in some solar energy before walking out of the infirmary. I really need to stop bothering recovery girl, and having Momo worry about me. I need to hustle since it's the semifinals and my match with Shiozaki is about to begin soon. I feel a bit sluggish though, so I'll hang the booth for a bit to rejuvenate. And quat. Midoriya said as he jogged to the booth, getting many compliments on the way from several members of the audience and even some pro heroes. He smiled and thanked them all before turning a corner and bumped into someone, causing the person he bumped into to fall forward. Midoriya quickly recovered and flashed in front of the person and caught them. He ended up getting a closer look and recognized the familiar hairstyle. Ah, Momo, I'm sorry, he said as he helped her up. Izuku, did you just get released? Yaoyorozu asked as she glanced over him, frowning at the bandages wrapped around his arms and forehead, and placed her hand on his arm, running her finger over the bandages before looking at Midoriya. He could tell that his injuries were bothering her, and he couldn't blame her as he was on the same boat, but he pulled her into a hug, surprising her initially, but then she wrapped her arms around him and held him tightly. I heard you won your match against Ashido, great job. And quat. He said as he held her, feeling her plant her chin on his shoulder as she chuckled. It was a rather interesting match. I did have fun fighting her. Although, Ida's the one I'm worried about. After his match, he wouldn't say anything to us and then he excused himself as he had a phone call. Once he returned, he didn't say a word to anyone, not even to Uraka. And quat. She said. Midoriya looked at her in shock before, rubbing his temple, trying to remember Ida's behavior, but couldn't find anything odd about it. Come to think of it, I haven't seen Ida ever since his first match. I wonder what happened. Anyways, why are you here, Momo? Midoriya still had the nagging feeling that something was amiss from Ida's behavior, but for right now, he focused in on his next match against Shiozaki. I just finished talking to my parents. Apparently they've been watching the festival. They congratulated me and overall was a very happy moment, although ... And quat. She looked down and began to fidget around, a small blush creeping on her face. Midoriya cocked his head to the side in confusion before taking a step closer to get a better look at her. I don't sense that you have a fever. What were you going to tell me? Was it something your parents said? He asked her. Her blush deepened as she kicked her feet out a little and then she slowly looked up at him. I may have told my parents that I was dating you, and now they want to meet you. And quat. She said and fiddled with her thumbs. Midoriya blinked and then realized what he heard and immediately panicked a bit as this was going way too fast for him at the moment, but he understood why she was reluctant to tell him. I see, well, it can't be helped, right? Midoriya said nervously, and then he placed his hand on her shoulder. We can cross that bridge when we need to. Anyways, did your match just end? He asked her. Yes it did, your match was pushed back a bit because of your recovery, so your match should start in about 5 minutes. You're up against Shiozaki, but I believe that you should be able to win. However, I'm facing Bakugo. I believe I can win it. And quat. Yaoyorozu said as she turned around and started walking, looking over her shoulder at him expectantly. He jogged to her side and the two of them made their way to the intersection, and Yaoyorozu turned around and smiled at him. Make sure you win against her. I would like to fight you in the finals. And quat. She said with smile and made her way to the boot, leaving Midoriya there with a smile. Participants Izuku Midoriya and Ibara Shiozaki, your match is about to begin. Please be ready in 3 minutes. And quat. The intercom repeated for a couple of seconds before turning off, and the young boy looked at the hallway to the arena. He quickly went over some strategies to win against the Vine user, and after going through multiple scenarios, he figured using his speed would ultimately be a success, so he went with it. He then made his way to the arena, letting the warm sunlight embrace him as the crowd cheered on as he walked up the stairs and waited on his side for Shiozaki. A couple of seconds later, the Class 1B vice president walked up to the arena, holding her hands together like she was in prayer. After a couple of seconds, she looked up at him and smiled. I do believe this will be a good match, Midoriya. One worthy of the Lord's attention. And quat. She said and her eyes hardened, the air around becoming serious as she was ready for the match. Midoriya smiled and also got ready, waiting for midnight to start the match. The pro hero appeared on her platform and watched as the two semi-finalists began stretching themselves out, or it was Midoriya doing the stretching and Shiozaki was praying some more. After they both were done with their respected pre-match actions, Midnight held her whip high in the air. 3, 2, 1, Begin, she yelled out, and vines immediately sprouted all around the green-haired kid as they tried to grip him. But he managed to dodge the attack and sent a wave at her, easily cutting through her vines, causing the girl to shriek as she ducked to avoid the wave and conjured a wall of vines in front of her to protect herself from any other incoming attacks from her opponent, thus blocking her view from Midoriya getting in close to her and bending the light to appear invisible. He snapped his fingers and rays of light came crashing down on Shiozaki. She dodged the attacks and sent her vines to attack, but saw that Midoriya was nowhere to be found. She then felt warmth under her neck and took a glimpse down, seeing Midoriya's hand at her neck. He had his hand in a knife position as he held her other hand behind her back. She tried to break free, but his grip tightened. I see, you used your quirk to hide from me. I should have known not to take your quirk lightly, and my punishment is my defeat. I surrender. Shiozaki said, causing Midoriya to release his grip on her and rub the back of his head. She turned around and bowed before him. It greatly saddens me that our match wasn't all too long. I, however, would like to battle you once more after I get stronger. Until then, Midoriya. Shiozaki said and then walked off the stadium, her hands clasped together as she walked out of the center stage. Midoriya watched her retreating figure, playing with the hems of his top, and waited for midnight to signal the end of the match. Ibara Shiozaki surrenders, making Izuku Midoriya the winner. He will now move on to the finals. The next match between Katsuki Bakugo and Momo Yaoyorozu will begin shortly. Will those two participants please make your way to the arena in 5 minutes. Midnight announced before getting off of it and making her way over to Cementos, and the two began to discuss something. Midoriya turned and began making his way out of the center. His eyes darted to the Class 1A booth, seeing Yaoyorozu already making her way down the stairs. His gaze shifted to the UA staff section of the stands, seeing Toshinori gazing down at him. He smiled and gave him a thumbs up before turning his gaze into the booth, presumably that someone had started a conversation with his mentor. He let his gaze idle as he made his way to see if he could catch Yaoyorozu before the match. Pressed, Shoto. Midoriya turned the corner and saw Todoroki alongside his father, Endeavor. The two were in a conversation. The two Todorokis turned to look at the uninvited guest, and both saw the green-haired boy standing there with a worried expression. Oh, I'm sorry for bothering you. I'll just move right along now. Midoriya squeaked as he quickly rushed past the two, making a clear point not to make eye contact with them. The father-son duo watched as he went around the corner, bumping his shoulder into the edge in the process. After that, footsteps slowly dissipated from within hearing range. Was that the boy that defeated you, Shoto? Endeavor said, his expression seemingly turned passive-aggressive, but was all too familiar with Todoroki. He nodded and continued to look at the corner Midoriya disappeared from. Huh, interesting. The number 2 hero said, stroking his flaming beard. Line break. Midoriya caught his breath as he held his hand on the wall, his heart racing from the brief encounter with Endeavor. He felt his heartbeat slowly becoming constant again, and with that, let out a huge sigh. He continued on with the walk and eventually made it to the waiting room. He was about to knock when the door swung open, revealing Yaoyorozu. She was taken aback with Midoriya's sudden appearance, but smiled as she shuffled out of the room. Hey. She said. Hey yourself. Midoriya said, and the two of them began to make their way to the intersection once more. They passed a trash can, and she asked him to wait for her. He nodded and watched as she pulled a couple of chocolate wrappers and tossed them in the bin. Jogging to his side, she also then took out a small book and began to flip through the contents until she reached her place. She twirled her hand and created a pencil from her palm, and then began to write something down on the paper. Midoriya was tempted to look at what she was writing, but decided against just in case it wasn't any of his business. If you're wondering what I'm doing, I've written down dates that are important. So, I'll be prepared for what's about to come. Look. Yaoyorozu handed him the book, and he began to look at all of the dates, most notable, in 2 days' time. Why does it have a star at this date, Momo? He showed her. Those dates? I thought you knew about them, Izuku. They're for the internships, and that's when we will be getting the list of agencies we could intern in. It was sent in the class representative chat by Principal Nezu, as a way for us to get ahead of the work behind it, you know? She said as she grabbed the book from his hands and quickly looked through it just in case before handing it back. Can you hold this? I don't want that flying out of my pockets and Bakugo blowing it to smithereens. Or along those lines. Midoriya nodded and slipped it into his pocket, feeling the book alongside his phone in his left pocket. They idly chatted over many small things, like what was happening in their lives and the news. They eventually halted their walk as they made it to the intersection. I guess I'll see you later, Izuku. Yaoyorozu said, pulling him into a quick hug and smiled at him. Knock 'em dead, Momo, Midoriya said, causing her to chuckle and jogged her way to the center stage, waving as she disappeared in the light produced from outside. He was worried that her opponent was Bakugo, but he had confidence that she was able to pull through this match. Fishing his phone out of his pocket, he began to check the news as he went up the stairs to the booth. He scrolled down the web page, not seeing interesting as he sat down, saying a quick hello to Uraka and the rest of his classmates. He continued to scroll down until he quickly stopped the page, seeing an article that sent chills down his spine. Hero killer strikes again. Midoriya muttered as he looked over the article, seeing the description of the attack. He continued to scroll down until something caught his eye and he quickly stopped. His eyes widened at the latest victim's name, and that made an uneasy feeling run through his very body. The latest victim was Ingenium, real name, Tensei, Ida, Ida's brother ... and quad. He looked around the booth, and as he thought, Ida wasn't there. He quickly went back to the article, and began to skim through it, reading the injuries and reports of it. He bit his thumb as he understood why Ida was acting that way from observations from Yaoyorozu. Hero killer. I've read several articles about how he kills pro heroes, and claims that what he's doing is justice and quad. I should check if Ida is alright, but first, need to focus on the match. And quad. He pocketed his phone and looked up, seeing Midnight holding her whip high in the air. 1. Let the match begin. The 18+ hero said, and immediately Bakugo used his explosions to get in close to Yaoyorozu, but she was able to respond to his actions and created a blast-resistant shield in front of her. The blonde saw what she was doing and quickly used his quirk to skillfully maneuver over the shield, but he quickly saw that she had planned on him doing just that and jabbed him in the stomach with her staff. Then she quickly stuck a bomb of sorts on his abdomen. It exploded, and blinded Bakugo as he growled out, already getting pissed off. It was short-lived as he tried to fire off an explosion, only to feel the end of Yaoyorozu's staff being thrusted into his stomach. Fucking damn it, he yelled out and rubbed his eyes, trying to get his eyes focused, but that allowed Yaoyorozu to quickly get in a couple of jabs with her staff in as she gracefully whacked him in the side before twirling the staff and her whole body, and landed another strike at the side, using the spin as a modifier to her strike. Bakugo's temper was unleashed as he screamed out and launched a massive explosion at her direction, forcing Yaoyorozu to shield herself with her shield, giving the boy enough time to recover his eyesight and immediately set his gaze at her, causing Midoriya to get pulled in as he started to grip the rails in front of him. Uraka saw this and grew worried as she felt the peaceful air around him turn different, and it wasn't just her. Everyone was looking at him with worry, as they saw his hands were gripping the rails even tighter than before. Deku, what's wrong? Uraka stuttered out, a hint of fear in her voice as she could feel the tension Midoriya made as he continued to hold his gaze at his childhood best friend. That look, the last time I saw that look is when someone pissed Kachan off to his very limits. After that, the boy was hospitalized for more than 3 months. And quad. Midoriya said, causing everyone's eyes to widen as they looked at Bakugo, and they could see the twitches and the literal steam coming from the hothead. Are you serious, man? Kirishima asked as Kaminari had a troubled expression on her face. People like Mineta and Aoyama were sweating bullets while others like Jiro and Ashido were looking Yaoyorozu with worry. Yeah, Kirishima, I know, because I was that person. And quad. Midoriya said as a shadow was casted over his eyes, and loud gasps were heard from the group as people looked at him with shock, while others with sorrow. Uraka's eyes widened as she slowly placed her hand on his shoulders, feeling his body shaking. Everyone else looked at the boy with pity, while Jiro and Kaminari glanced over at Bakugo with disgust. What happened, Midoriya? Kirishima placed his hand on his back and sat on the other side of his friend. He didn't see any tears falling down his face, but he could tell that either he was about to cry, or was about to do something drastic. He shook his head and focused on what was in front of him. After a couple minutes of silence, Midoriya cleared his throat and looked up. His eyes had a variety of emotions, from hate to sadness, all mixed in his green orbs. The green-haired boy quietly thanks both Kirishima and Uraka before sighing and placed his hands on his lap. It was about the time of 5th grade, on the second to last day of school. Flashback: Midoriya stood above someone else, as they were injured. Midoriya had a fearful expression on his face as he faced the bully of the downed person, Katsuki Bakugo. The blonde was cackling and had a malicious grin on his face as he fired off several explosions, impressing nearly everybody at that school. There was a group of people around Bakugo that basically idolized him for his uncanny quirk. Kachan, stop messing with people you don't like, Midoriya said, standing with his arms outstretched, as if he was protecting the boy on the ground. Bakugo scoffed at Midoriya and fired off more explosions, causing the two boys in front of him to cower in fear. What are you going to do about it, huh, Deku? After all, you're quirkless. You can't do anything, you nerd. Weakling, worthless Deku, Bakugo yelled out, and many of the observers started to laugh, making fun of him. Midoriya was scared out of his mind, but he tried his best to mimic a hero. You're nothing more than a bully, Kachan. A no-good bully that can't be a hero that saves people. You can't be like All Might, you stupid bully, Midoriya shouted out in anger. The feeling in his stomach swelled. Everyone suddenly grew quiet as the panting coming from Midoriya was the only thing heard. A shadow was casted over Bakugo's eyes while everyone around the boy slowly backed away from the hothead. The blonde's hands were twitching as an aura of death suddenly made its way throughout the air and all around. Midoriya was still angry over the bullying, so he hadn't noticed the sudden change in behavior for his childhood friend, but the kid on the ground did and quietly crawled away from Midoriya. It was only a matter of time before the bomb was about to explode, and a couple of seconds later, it did. It happened so fast that Midoriya didn't comprehend what had happened. All he remembered was standing 1 second and the next being sent flying into something hard, then just darkness. Quickly after the incident, Midoriya was immediately rushed to the hospital and put into the ER, where they rushed to keep his condition stable. After many grueling hours, many of the doctors sighed in relief as they managed to stabilize his condition. Inko rushed in with a frantic look of desperation as she went over to her child's operation bed, soaking in the sight of his bandages wrapped body and all the wires hooked all over his body. Tears were streaming down on her face as she cupped his face after getting the doctor's approval and silently wept. Bakugo was forced to enter a remedial and disciplinary course as a result of the mishap. However, Inko wished it was expulsion, but the school didn't want to lose their top student when it came to quirks. So, that was the action that the school's administration, and they didn't see the point in doing anything as it was almost the end of the school year. Inko obviously was angry with the school, but she was even more mad at Bakugo and she expressed that loud and clear to Mitsuki, his mother. Both of them were very good friends, so when Mitsuki opened the door to see her in a very sour mood, she knew something was up. After a round of tea and revelations, Mitsuki punished Bakugo with her very own technique, but Inko didn't hear the details. Flashback end. After that, 3 months had passed and I regained consciousness. Several more checkups were made in order to double-check anything they may had missed. Eventually, I was released and ended up joining junior high earlier. Next thing I knew, Bakugo also attended the school. After that, I'm sure you can guess via our current relationship. And quote. Midoriya finished, glancing over everyone's faces, seeing the disbelief and shock. He sighed before returning his gaze to the match, which was currently at a standstill. Many of the people in the booth were at a loss of words as they heard something that shouldn't have happened, and what made it worse is that Midoriya might not have been here with them. The air turned pensive as everyone couldn't say anything to what they just heard, and opted to watch the match, and quote. Yaoyorozu watched Bakugo with a close eye, tightening her grip on the shield as she also felt the sudden demeanor change in the blonde. She felt a drop of sweat drip down her back as she patiently waited for Bakugo to act. She even created several flashbangs and ice bombs just in case something was about to happen. The entire stadium grew anxious as the tension was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. All of a sudden, small explosions fired off as Bakugo slowly moved his fingers, and a low, menacing growl was heard as it grew louder and more ferocious. He looked up at Yaoyorozu, and it struck fear in her heart as she hasn't seen so much bloodlust and anger before, but she held firm and didn't back down. Die. Bakugo suddenly propelled himself using both hands, launching him straight at her. She stood firm and held her shield as he grew ever closer. She saw his hand move to aim towards the ground and quickly moved her feet in order to counteract the mobility that he planned to use against. He didn't do that and instead charged straight at her, shoulder rushing her shield, and the force of the impact went full force into her arm, fracturing her arm in the process. The recoil of the blow threw Yaoyorozu off balance and Bakugo capitalized on this and sent a huge explosion at the shield, further damaging her arm. Yaoyorozu began to panic as she tried to gain some ground with the help of her flashbangs and ice bombs, but Bakugo was faster and got past the shield, a wicked grin on his face as he launched an explosion to her side. She screamed in pain as she was sent flying, landing on the ground with a loud crash. She could barely stand as her legs felt like jelly and both of her arms were basically out of commission. Midoriya gritted his teeth, but controlled his anger as it wouldn't help. In fact, it would make it even worse. But, seeing Yaoyorozu in pain caused the bubble in him to swell, and his blood boiling even more. His hand gripped the railing in front of him as he continued to watch the match, seeing her unable to move with Bakugo moving ever closer to her. She felt pain all over her body, but she managed to create some more ice bombs from her backside and quickly rolled over, using her body to send the bombs to the blonde. It set off right in front of the boy. It had some effect on him, and that effect was it made him even more pissed as he launched several more explosions on at her, inflicting even more pain on her, and further increasing the resentment building inside Midoriya. Each scream of pain caused many of Class 1A to cringe and some even looked away, like Kota and Hagakure, while others were showing signs of anger, like Jiro and Kaminari. Yaoyorozu could still feel the explosions going off, and her consciousness began to fade, which did not go unnoticed by midnight as the hero quickly signaled Cementos to shield her from Bakugo. The cement hero did so and created a barrier between the two, but Bakugo was still trying to destroy the barrier. "Damn it, this guy is out of control," Midnight said as she ripped part of her costume to restrain the boy, but the explosions caused the mist to be blown back. She clicked her tongue and cracked her whip, and then she struck Bakugo in the back with it, getting the hothead's attention. His head turned so fast that it looked like he had snapped it. "What was that for, you cougar?" Bakugo yelled out, and veins appeared on Midnight's forehead as she glared at the boy. She then rolled her whip and held it as she looked at the boy, then to the audience. Due to sustaining heavy injuries and his close unconsciousness, Momo Yaoyorozu is unable to fight. However, Katsuki Bakugo will be disqualified due to recklessness, abandon and dangerous use of his power, making the winner of the school festival Izuku Midoriya, Midnight said, and Bakugo's face scrunched up in rage as he was about to blast Midnight to shreds. However, wait. And quat. All noise stopped as everyone turned their attention to the speaker, which was Midoriya as he light dashed into the stadium. His face had a passive expression, but the look in his eyes had a story of their own. Bakugo turned around and snarled at the green-haired boy, but no reaction was seen as he walked past the blonde and stopped at the edge of the arena, his gaze on Midnight. "I would like to fight Katsuki Bakugo for the finale of the festival. And quat," Midoriya said, and then turned to Bakugo, who had a crazy look on his face as mini explosions fired off in his hands. His smile sent fear to many of the audience as he voiced his approval for this fight. "Me against Deku? I'll blow your ass to shreds, weak ass," Bakugo yelled out. Midoriya just turned his entire body towards him, and all of a sudden, the temperature dropped a couple of degrees. Everyone felt the drop and wondered what just had happened, but Midnight felt the core of the temperature drop as she looked over at the green-haired kid and saw an icy aura around him. She then pressed her ear to the Bluetooth she had and listened to the instructions. "Are you sure you want to continue this, Principal?" "Alright. And quat." She dropped her hand and walked onto the stand. She waved her hand in order to get everyone's attention, and then she cleared her throat. Change of plans. The last fight of the festival between Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo will commence in 5 minutes. The pro hero said, and people were shocked at first, but suddenly, people were cheering for the fight as they wanted to see a satisfying ending to a great day in history. Midnight then looked at each of the boys, seeing the manically look that Bakugo had as he was smiling, finally having his opportunity to destroy Deku on national TV. She then saw several medical robot assistants rushing in and grabbed Yaoyorozu, and rushed her out of the stadium to go to the infirmary. She overheard the robots saying that she had a lot of injuries, but she was going to pull through. The hero sighed and then looked at Midoriya, and shivers were sent down her spine as she caught glimpse of his expression. A blank look, but underneath it was look of rage and anger that was trying to be suppressed. She even felt colder when she stood next to him. "Why did I sign up for this?" She rubbed her temple and sighed. Well, it seems like you've made it to the end of Part 3-2. What if Deku had a sun and moon quirk? I hope all of you enjoyed, and I wish all of you a wonderful day/night. Bye.